And if you think about the 5 elements of the conversation, really they kind of are equal as you move toward the center. So you have the greeting and the closing, which are opposites, and you have topic priming and preliminary processing, which are kind of serving the same purpose but opposites. And then you have heart of the conversation in the middle. So that's an easy way for me anyway, as a visual person, to remember they almost fold in toward each other in opposites. And so if you think about topic priming, okay, let's see how this conversation is going to go, then on the other side of the heart of the conversation, you have the processing where you say, well, how did that go? So you can see that that's kind of a parallel. So basically, when we're processing, we consider the effect that our conversation had on each of us. So how did the conversation affect us, and how did the conversation affect the other people? So did he or she understand, agree, disagree, etc.? Do I need to rephrase or modify? Is there something that I maybe didn't communicate effectively or wasn't clearly expressed? Are we moving on to another topic? So sometimes preliminary processing just takes you back to the second step where you're topic priming again. Because if you realize we're moving on to a new topic, you're not going back to the greeting because the conversation's already in the process. So you go to topic priming. Or you can also determine, are we done? So preliminary processing, how did that go? Did I discuss everything I wanted to discuss? Is the conversation coming to a close? And if it is, then comes the closing, where we just say goodbye. Now there are 3 functions of a good closing. The first is it signals the upcoming ending of the conversation and impending inaccessibility of one party. Now remember, when we talked about the greeting, it was demonstrating your accessibility. So now the closing is the opposite. You are basically communicating that you are inaccessible after the closing occurs. A good closing includes supportive tone and appreciative tone, and sets desire for future conversations. So, hey, I enjoyed speaking with you, let's do it again. That is a good closing. And then another element would be summarizing the main topics that were discussed. So it's important to kind of do a brief overview of what was covered or what was, communicated in that conversation. So now that we have looked a little further into 5 elements of a conversation, thinking back to our Alberto example, are there any additional thoughts that we now have about helping him with this information? So remember, the question I asked was, what advice would you have given him about how to survive and thrive at a company, party, or similar function? So now you can either answer it using the 5 elements here or answer it how you would have answered it before we talked about all this. Either way, I guess I probably should have thought that through a little better, but if you would like to just what you normally would have responded, what advice would you have given him before you heard this lecture, that would be fine. Or if you actually want to get into the 5 elements and how those would have changed your advice for him, you can do that as well. So what from the greeting, topic priming, conversation, preliminary processing, and closing that you understand now can be used to help him in that scenario? Okay, so when we talk about conversation management, we have to think about, if we think about conversation as a game and there are rules, then there are also expectations of making sure that there are equal things happening. You can't play a game fairly if the other person never gets a turn, or if there's not equality in the game. And so if we think about conversation management, there's turn-taking, where the changing of speaking and listening in the conversation takes place. There's obviously cooperation. It's very difficult to have a conversation with yourself, at least if you want any feedback, and engaging in dialogue. So you want to make sure that, when you think about management of a conversation, those 3 elements are included. So if we think about turn-taking, another way to phrase it, if you will, is yielding the floor. So when we are thinking about turn taking, there's a give and take, obviously. So there are different components, though, that communicate whether or not you want to continue your turn, or if you're ready to give the turn to the other person. And so how we do that is with turn maintaining and turn yielding. So our turn maintaining, we vocalize pauses. In other words, rather than just letting there be silence, which can be often confused with, okay, they're done speaking, we fill that silence and we vocalize our pauses with or some other type of word, if you will, or vocalization that communicates we're still thinking and we're still processing what we're going to say next. Now, another way that we turn maintain is exhibit a gesture that says I'm not done. So we might hold up our finger if we're thinking, or we might, continue hand motions even when we're thinking, so that it's clear that we still have more to say. And interestingly, we avoid direct eye contact when we want to continue to speak. And so those are the most common ways that people maintain their turn in a conversation. Now, when we are ready to yield our turn, we do make direct eye contact, and that's basically the surrender of the turn. And so it's almost as if, as we speak, we have the freedom to look around and to, collect our thoughts and to not necessarily focus on the individual, but then when it's their turn, we look at them and make eye contact, almost as if, okay, we are now ready to listen to you, and we have to look at you so that we're truly listening. We also may ask a question or nod in the other person's direction. So after we finish what we want to say, we say, what do you think? Or how do you feel? Or what are your thoughts? Or sometimes we just, communicate non-verbally by, like, okay, it's your turn. And we went back to the vocalize the pauses. That was the way that we did not use silence. And so also, if we just stop talking and we're silent, that will also indicate that we're ready to give up the floor. So that is as the speaker. Let me make that clear. It's not written there, but turn taking is contingent on the speaker most of the time. Now, as the listener, you have two options as well. There's turn requesting and turn denying. So if we want a chance to speak and someone else is speaking, we can use a verbal interjection very similar to the vocalized pauses when we want to maintain the turn. If we're asking for a turn, we will use a verbal interjection such as sometimes I say well. And so those are verbal interjections where it's clear that we would like to say something further, but rather than just interrupting and launching into our thought, we give a very short verbal interjection to communicate that we would like to have a turn. We're requesting the turn and hoping that the speaker will yield their turn to us. Another thing that can happen is we open our mouth as if we're ready to contribute a thought, but we don't actually say anything. And so you might see someone go, and then they stop because they either realize, well, I don't want to interrupt, or it's just kind of a nuance that we have learned that if we do that, it communicates that, well, we have something to say, but we'll wait until you say, okay, you can share with me what you'd like to think now. Another thing that we would do if we were requesting a turn is to lean forward and look directly at the speaker, because remember, eye contact is the way that we communicate whether or not we're going to maintain the turn or yield the turn. And so when we're turn requesting, we make eye contact because we want to have that interaction. And then another thing might be gesturing for attention with your hand. So you could do a little wave or raise your hand a little bit or do any type of hand motion that communicates, I'd like your attention and I'd like to share something. Now, turn denying as the listener is where we avoid the speaker's eye contact. You can use silence or shaking your head to indicate that you have nothing to add. So this I would think this would be an example when you don't really feel comfortable in the situation, or you're not really sure what you want to say. And so in those situations, you're really kind of trying to avoid any and all opportunities to say something. So you do not look at the speaker. You either just are completely silent, or you shake your head to indicate that you have no thoughts. And then nodding your head is kind of, the opposite of that, but it indicates that you're understanding and the person should continue. And those are all ways that we turn deny. In other words, no, you can keep going. I'm fine to just continue to sit here and listen. So, when we think about conversations, there is a cooperation principle, which basically is that a conversation is most satisfying when partners remain consistent to the conversation's purpose. So that's kind of weighty, so let's look at that a little further. We find conversations most fulfilling and most satisfying when the people involved maintain the conversation's original purpose. So if we think back, you have the greeting and then you have topic priming. At the moment of topic priming, both people are aware of the topic that is going to be discussed. So at the end of the conversation, if both people remained consistent to that purpose and that topic, then there will be a higher level of satisfaction with the conversation. And in an effort to have that cooperation principle, there are 4 guides, and they are quality, quantity, relevancy, and manner. And just to briefly kind of give you a little more information on those, the quality of the information. So you have your topic primed, you have an awareness of what's going to be discussed, you get into the heart of the conversation, and it's quality information that is exchanged. Now, quality is relative, and so it can be a very superficial discussion, but if both parties find that information significant, that is quality information. So we're not talking about, it can't be chit chat. That's not what quality means. It's just, it has to be something that is satisfying to both people in the conversation. Now, quantity is, again, remaining consistent to the conversation's purpose. So if the conversation needs tons and tons and tons of discussion and details, then you have a lot of quantity. If the conversation only needs a few sentences and it covers the topic, then that was satisfactory as well. So it's just a matter of remaining consistent to the topic. Remember, it doesn't really matter the quantity as long as it's appropriate for the topic. Now, relevancy, that's kind of self-explanatory. You want the information shared to be relevant and purposeful for your topic. And then the manner in which it's communicated is also important. And so that's really more about your approach and your, dynamics in the conversation. You're courteous, you're respectful, those types of things. Okay, so how many times have we heard or said, I didn't really mean that? And I want to quickly discuss conversational blunders, because when we're in a conversation, sometimes things do not come out the way we intend, or we say something and we immediately wish we wouldn't have, or things are interpreted in a way that we really did not anticipate the conversation would go in that direction. So when we have conversational faux pas, it's important to kind of think through all of the things that we've discussed, and then we can move forward from there. So if you can think about a conversational blunder that you either witnessed, maybe it wasn't necessarily yours, but you were aware of one that took place, or a personal conversational blunder that you'd be willing to share, what do you do to repair the damage? What are your suggestions or tips or techniques that